They say the Ultramarines are the shining sons of humanity, paragons of discipline, the Emperor's perfect warriors, noble in thought and pure in purpose. But tell me, how noble is a blade that kills without question? How pure is faith when it burns worlds clean? There was a time when their name inspired awe. The banners of Ultramar stood as beacons amidst the endless dark, blue-clad angels of order, sweeping through the galaxy with the cold precision of gods. Yet beneath their heraldry, beneath the marble and the hymns, there is something else. A shadow. A truth no one dares speak aloud. It begins, as all imperial tragedies do, with silence. The silence of a city kneeling before its saviors. The silence before a bombardment order is given. The silence of billions praying for mercy that will never come. Calth remembered. Macraga remembered. Even the stars remember. They call themselves protectors of mankind. But to the worlds they protect, protection means subjugation, salvation through obedience. And those who falter, those who question, those who refuse to kneel, learn what it truly means to face the sons of Guilliman. In the ruins of Thoas-4, a single banner still flutters amid glassed soil and ash. Once, it was a thriving shrine world dedicated to Saint Aelia of the Dawn, a place where the Emperor's name was whispered with joy, not fear. When heretical cults spread through the lower catacombs, the people begged for help, and help came, clad in cobalt blue. The Ultramarines landed with the discipline of a celestial storm. Their drop pods struck like thunderbolts, ceramite feet crushing the soil of their faith. They came not as saviors but as judges. Chaplain Vortan led the cleansing, his Crozius a symbol of divine wrath, his Vox channel filled with hymns of loyalty and purity. He spoke of duty, of the Emperor's light. His every word carried the weight of righteousness. But what followed was not salvation. It was erasure. The cults were rooted out, yes, along with every civilian who had ever spoken with them, traded with them, or simply lived too near. Entire hab blocks were burned clean. Families herded into squares to kneel before the angels of death. The chaplain's voice echoed through the smoke. Purity is not mercy, it is sacrifice. When the guns fell silent, Thoas-4 no longer had heretics, nor citizens, only ash. And from orbit, the Ultramarines fleet declared the planet cleansed in faith. This is the tragedy of the Imperium, not its cruelty but its conviction. The Ultramarines believe themselves just because they cannot imagine they are not. They are perfect soldiers of a broken god, built to maintain a decaying order. To them, mercy is treason, pity is corruption, and doubt is heresy. Robert Guilliman, their father, once dreamed of reason, of logic and unity in the name of mankind's survival. He built Ultramar as a bastion of civilization, where worlds thrived under careful governance. But what began as a vision became a cage. Ultramar is order incarnate. Every world, every citizen, every heartbeat measured and weighed. Compliance is not optional, it is devotion, and devotion is life. To the outside eye, it is paradise compared to the madness of the wider Imperium. The cities gleam, the crops grow, the people sing praises. But listen closer, and you'll hear it. The trembling in their voices when they recite their oaths, the fear in their eyes when an Astartes walks the streets. In Ultramar, peace is maintained not through love, but through reverence born of terror. The Ultramarines do not rule by tyranny, they rule by example. A holy, immaculate example none can ever hope to meet. Ask yourself, when perfection becomes law, what happens to those who are merely human? In the archives of Espandor lies a record erased from public memory. It tells of the 9th cohort of the Ultramar Auxilia, mortal soldiers who once fought under the command of Captain Easthen Varro. During a campaign against the Xenos of the Gorix Reach, Varro defied orders to retreat. He chose instead to protect the planetary refugees, buying them time to flee. His stand saved 10,000 lives. But when Guilliman's successors learned of his disobedience, he was executed for insubordination. His entire cohort struck from the rolls, their names expunged from the codex. The refugees never knew. They still light candles for him in secret, whispering his name like a forbidden prayer. That is the Ultramarine way. Honor, duty, obedience, even unto damnation. They are not monsters because they lack compassion. They are monsters because they believe their cruelty is compassion. To question their code is to question Guilliman himself. And he, the returned son of the Emperor, has no patience for doubt. When he awoke from his long death, the galaxy was aflame. Chaos ran rampant. And yet, when he looked upon the Imperium his brothers had left behind, he did not weep for its suffering. He rebuilt it, reforged it, reshaped it in his image. They call it the Imperium Sanctus, a realm where faith and bureaucracy intertwine like barbed wire. A place where the machinery of empire devours itself endlessly, and the Ultramarines stand at its head, ensuring it never falters, never sleeps, never dares to change. Some say Guilliman weeps in private, mourning what humanity has become. Others say he has long since ceased to feel sorrow at all, that he is the Emperor's son not merely in flesh but in the coldness of his soul. In battle, the Ultramarines are magnificent, unstoppable engines of discipline and wrath. They strike like a living scripture, every maneuver a verse of war. Their enemies call them the Blue Doom, but even their allies whisper fears. For once the Ultramarines arrive, they do not leave until the world kneels. During the compliance of Phocis Prime, the planetary governor, a devout loyalist, hesitated to surrender his autonomy. He wished to maintain local traditions, harmless rites of the pre-imperial era. The Ultramarines answered with orbital fire. They turned his capital to dust, and when the survivors begged to know their sin, the Primarch himself replied, "Imperium allows no kingdoms but its own." To Guilliman, mercy was chaos, freedom was entropy, and so, through his sons, he taught the galaxy to fear peace. Every Codex Astartes regulation, every prayer of discipline, every act of cold efficiency, all of it is meant to bind the Imperium together in an iron chain of logic. But logic cannot love, logic cannot forgive, and logic, in the end, cannot save the soul of man. There are whispers in the shadowed corridors of Ultramar's fortress monasteries, whispers of discontent, of Astartes who begin to question their endless duty. Some vanish into silence, reassigned to distant crusades. Others are said to have taken their own lives, unable to reconcile what they are with what they were told to be. One such name is Sergeant Merrin Thale, once of the Fourth Company. A decorated veteran, loyal beyond measure. During the scourging of Altaris Reach, he witnessed the execution of 1,000 civilians accused of harboring psychers. He followed orders. He lit the pyres himself. Afterward, he walked into the Basilica of the Codex and tore off his helm before the statue of Guilliman. Witnesses say he wept blood. His final words, etched into the marble by trembling mortal hands, read, "If this is purity, then let the void judge us all." The inscription was removed, the basilica was rededicated, and the Ultramarines marched on. Because the machine must not stop, the order must hold, the dream of Guilliman must endure, even if it means drowning every star in silence. They say the Ultramarines are the good guys, but good is a word that has no meaning here. In the far future, there is only faith without question, war without end, and righteousness without soul. And somewhere, deep within the endless archives of Macraga, lies a sealed record, stamped with the sigil of the Inquisition, marked Heretical Inquiry, Guilliman Protocol 9. A record that speaks of something long hidden, something buried within the gene seed itself. Something the sons of Ultramar would kill to protect. The file's last line is redacted, save for a single phrase. The Primarch knew. And as the void hums with the echo of dying stars, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The Ultramarines were never meant to save mankind. They were meant to preserve it, even if preservation means extinction. Even if the Emperor's angels must become his executioners, even if the light they bring is colder than the dark. For in the grim shadow of Ultramar, where order reigns eternal and mercy lies buried beneath marble and gold, the question still lingers, a whisper carried by dying worlds. What if the greatest sin of the Imperium was believing it was ever good at all? The answer, perhaps, lies not in what they have destroyed, but in what they still keep hidden. And something is hidden. Something vast, something sacred, something that, if revealed, could unmake the myth of the Ultramarines forever. But that is another story. It began with the silence of a cathedral. The Basilica of the Ninefold Oath stood upon Macraga's frozen plains, its spires black against a sky of dying blue. Within, thousands of candles trembled before icons of the Primarch, each flame a prayer a plea for meaning in a universe where meaning had long since fled. The scent of incense mingled with the faint tang of ozone from the power conduits that ran through the walls, and in that holy quiet, Chaplain Erastes knelt. He had heard the whispers, the sealed record, the phrase, "The Primarch knew." He should have dismissed it as heresy, but the words clung to his mind like frost to metal. His faith, once granite, had begun to crack. If Guilliman knew, he whispered to the void, then what did he choose to forget? The question lingered like the echo of a gunshot. Outside, the fortress monastery stirred. Servitors dragged relic banners through the snow, tech marines chanted to the machine spirits, and mortal serfs bowed until their foreheads bled. The Ultramarines were preparing for war, though none dared say against whom. In the Strategium, Captain Drason of the Second Company stood before a hollow projection of a world he had never seen. Espandor, one of the jewel worlds of Ultramar. Now it flickered crimson, reports of unrest, priests refusing to recite the catechism of compliance, entire regiments laying down arms. The governor had sent a single message before transmission ceased. "We no longer serve the dead." Drason felt the chill of the words. "Rebellion," he muttered, though the tone carried something closer to disbelief. Rebellion was not possible within Ultramar. It was heresy against perfection. And yet, here it was. The order came directly from Guilliman's own seal. The 2nd and 7th Companies were to make planetfall, suppress the uprising, restore faith, by any means necessary. When the fleet arrived above Espandor, the void itself seemed to hold its breath. The planet shone beneath them, green, gold, serene. But the surface told a different story. Cities burned with quiet dignity, their flames forming strange patterns visible from orbit, symbols not of chaos, but of remembrance. The first waves descended. Brother Captain Drason led from the front, his armor painted in purity seals, his blade a relic from Guilliman's own vaults. As his boots struck the soil, his vox came alive with prayer and static. "Glory to Ultramar," he intoned. But there was no response. The enemy did not fight like heretics. They did not scream nor blaspheme. They simply stood, unarmed, unflinching, faces painted with the aquila, eyes filled not with hate but sorrow. One of them stepped forward, a woman robed like a priestess, holding a tome bound in blue leather. "We are still loyal," she said, her voice breaking the static. "But we are loyal to the truth you have buried." The bolter report was immediate. When her body fell, the tome burst open, pages scattering across the dust. carried by the wind like dying prayers. Drason glimpsed one page before it burned in the cleansing fire. It bore the sigil of the Primarch, and below it, the words, "The Emperor was never meant to wake." The phrase spread through the ranks like a contagion. None dared speak it aloud, yet all heard it, in the hum of the engines, the whine of the bolters, the murmuring of dying voxcasters. The chaplains silenced the whispers with sermons, but faith faltered. The more the Ultramarines purged, the more the rebellion grew. Not in numbers, but in conviction. The Loyalists sang hymns of defiance, invoking Guilliman's name as both God and betrayer. One night, as the moons of Espander burned above, Chaplain Erastes stood beside a mass grave. The corpses were stacked neatly, soldiers, civilians, children, their faces still serene, as though they'd died in prayer. He turned to the mortal aide beside him, a trembling man named Loras. "Do you believe this is righteousness?" Erastes asked quietly. Loras hesitated. "You told us that obedience is the Emperor's gift. And what if obedience has killed him?" The aide said nothing more. The following dawn, the entire 5th Company was found dead within their bivouac. No wounds, no struggle. Their hearts had simply stopped. Their Vox records, recovered later, captured a final transmission. "He walks again among the dead." Fear spread through the fleet like oil through water. Some said it was a curse, others a miracle. Guilliman himself made no statement. He merely ordered the campaign to continue. The librarians began reporting psychic disturbances, shadows moving through the warp, bearing ultramarine insignia. When one librarian attempted to probe deeper, his mind burst like glass under pressure, his last words recorded in agony. "The sons of the sun are not his." The meaning was lost, buried under classification and denial, but Erastes could feel the weight of it. Something was unraveling, not merely rebellion, but revelation. On the 7th day of the cleansing, Drason's strike force uncovered a subterranean archive beneath Espandor's capital. It was not of Xenos origin, nor heretic design. Its construction bore the mark of the Mechanicus, but older even than Guilliman's reign. Inside they found stasis vaults, hundreds, each marked with the Ultramar sigil, each sealed with purity codes written in Guilliman's own hand. "By the Codex, this is impossible," Drason breathed. When the first vault was opened, a hiss of cold air escaped. Within lay a body, an ultramarine, pristine and perfect, eyes closed as if in sleep. But the armor's markings were wrong, not Codex compliant. The heraldry bore no chapter symbol, only a single phrase inscribed across the chestplate. Before the Codex, there was the truth. The gene scan confirmed it. The DNA matched Guilliman's own. Dozens of identical signatures, replicas, attempts, failures. The Primarch had not simply written the Codex, he had rewritten himself. Erastes fell to his knees before the stasis chambers. "What are we?" he whispered. Drason did not answer. He only stared at the frozen faces of his brothers, the ghosts of what they might have been. "We are the lie that saved humanity," he said at last. Moments later, the fleet above received a transmission, not from the Ultramarines, but from Espandor's surviving clergy. It was Guilliman's voice, unmistakable, calm. "My sons," it said, "you have seen what was not meant to be seen. Return to Ultramar. Leave this world to silence. The truth is a burden none can bear, not even gods." The signal ended. Drason's command vessel turned toward Macraga that very hour, carrying the relics, the corpses, and a silence that screamed louder than any battle. But something lingered on Espandor. In the ruins of the archive, beneath the shattered vaults, the priestess's tome, the one that spoke of the Emperor's sleep, remained intact. It glowed faintly, symbols rearranging themselves as if alive. From the dust, a small group of survivors approached it, remnants of the planetary clergy. They read from its pages until their voices bled. When the next Imperial probe arrived months later, it found the world abandoned. No bodies, no fire, only inscriptions carved into stone and steel alike. The Emperor was never meant to wake. The son betrayed the father to save mankind. The lie endures, and we endure with it. On Macragge, Guilliman convened his council. The records of Espandor were classified Omega Null. All witnesses, Ultramarines, Mechanicus adepts, serfs, reassigned or quietly erased. The stasis bodies were sealed beneath the fortress of Hera, in vaults even the Inquisition could not breach. But Chaplain Erastes did not sleep. He heard them in his dreams, the frozen ones, the echoes of lost selves. They whispered of a dawn that must never come, of a truth that would tear the Imperium apart. And still, he prayed. Because faith, even when poisoned, is the only thing left in the dark. On the 41st night after Espandor's fall, Erastes stood upon the battlements overlooking Macragge's endless ice. He recited his litanies until the words turned to ash in his mouth. Then he looked to the stars, countless and cold. He knew one of them was dying. A single world, burning unseen, sending its final message into the void. It was not a distress signal, it was a confession. We have seen the face of the Emperor. It is not human. When that transmission reached Macragge, Guilliman himself ordered its erasure. The data stream was purged, the relay stations destroyed. But data has memory, and memory lingers in places it should not. Weeks later, an encrypted vox burst across the Ultramarine networks. It bore no origin trace, no signature, only a phrase, familiar, terrible, undeniable. The Primarch knew. Across the fleet, lights dimmed, voxes cut to static. For one long, eternal moment, every Astartes in Ultramar felt something, an echo in their blood, like the pulse of a forgotten god stirring in his tomb. And from somewhere beyond time, the darkness answered. Not with words, but with awakening, the kind that unravels everything. And in that moment, as the void shivered and the stars trembled like candles before a storm, the sons of Ultramar realized too late. It was not rebellion they had silenced. It was prophecy. It began as a whisper through the warp, a tremor that rippled across systems like the breath of a dying god. No one could name its source. No astropath could map its path. It moved through faith itself, a pulse that twisted hymns into laments and prayers into screams. On Macragge, the skies cracked with aurora fire. The fortress of Hera trembled as the statues of Guilliman seemed to weep molten tears. Across Ultramar, every vox channel repeated the same impossible signal. The Primarch knew. The words echoed through the network like a contagion, infecting the faithful, the devout, and the damned alike. Captain Dresson watched the transmission flicker across his command screen. His heart, once steel, felt heavy with doubt. He had killed for the Primarch, bled for his empire, burned worlds for the promise of order. Yet the whisper felt truer than any sermon. "If the Primarch knew," he murmured, "then what have we been fighting for?" No one answered. The silence became unbearable. In the depths of the Librarius, the Psychers screamed as the warp surged like a living tide. One after another, their eyes burst into light. Visions poured forth, of the Emperor upon his throne, flesh crumbling to dust, wires burrowing into his soul like worms of gold. They saw Guilliman kneeling before him, not in worship, but in despair. "You are not the Emperor," the Primarch whispered in the vision. "You are what remains." Then came the voice, cold, infinite and terrible. "And so are you." The Psychers died with their mouths open, whispering a name none recognized, Anathema reborn. Meanwhile, on Espandor's ruins, the survivors gathered. They had no leader, no god, only the tome left behind, glowing faintly in the ash. The priestess's followers called themselves the Remembered. They did not seek war. They sought truth. In hidden catacombs, they recited verses not of worship, but of recollection. Stories of the emperor before he was divine, of Guilliman before he was burdened. To them, salvation was not found in obedience, but in memory. When the Inquisition arrived to silence them, they found no rebellion, no armies, only voices. A chorus of mortals chanting one line over and over until their throats bled. The emperor was never meant to wake. Their bodies burned for heresy. But the chant remained, etched into the vox static, repeating itself in every transmission from Espandor's orbit. Even Guilliman could not silence it. The contagion spread, faith fractured. On Prandium, planetary governors declared independence in the name of the human truth. On Tarentus, ecclesiarchs tore down statues of saints, declaring them false idols of control. And on Macraga itself, the reclusium was divided, chaplains arguing doctrine with bolters drawn. Chaplain Erastes led those who still clung to belief, though he no longer knew what belief meant. Each prayer felt hollow. Each hymn echoed against stone walls that no longer felt sacred. He remembered the vaults, the stasis chambers filled with Guilliman's failed reflections, and wondered if the Primarch prayed too, or merely pretended. One night, Erastes entered the catacombs beneath the fortress of Hera. The air was still, the darkness absolute. The sealed vaults pulsed faintly with blue light, like heartbeats buried beneath marble. He knelt before them, whispering, "Father, if you knew, forgive us. If you did not, then we are already damned." The vaults answered, not with sound, but with movement. One chamber shuddered open, not by mechanism, but by will. Inside, the air steamed, thick with the scent of ancient stasis fluids. A figure stepped forth, an ultramarine, perfect in form yet wrong. His armor bore no chapter insignia, his eyes glowed with soft white fire. "Who are you?" Erastes breathed. "I am what he buried," the figure said, voice calm as still water. "The firstborn truth of Guilliman, the son that should have been." Before Erastes could speak, the figure raised a hand. In that gesture, Erastes saw memories not his own. Guilliman kneeling before the Emperor's throne, a pact sealed in silence. Guilliman's voice shaking as he swore to preserve the Imperium, not for mankind, but for the Emperor's prison. The Emperor was dying, not of flesh, but of soul. His divinity was artificial, fed by faith, sustained by sacrifice. To let him die would free humanity. To keep him alive would enslave it forever. Guilliman chose preservation, chose the lie. And so the Ultramarines were born not as saviors but as wardens. Erastes staggered back, bile rising in his throat. "No, it cannot be." "It must," said the figure, "for if he dies, the stars will scream, the warp will awaken, and all will end." Erastes fell to his knees, his mind fracturing between horror and faith. "Then what are we?" The figure's gaze softened. "The price of eternity." Outside, alarms wailed. The fortress trembled, orbital sensors flared, an unidentified fleet emerging from the void. The sigils were imperial yet ancient, predating the Great Rift, bearing the mark of the old Terran legions. At their head, a vessel once thought lost since the Horus Heresy, the Gloriana-class warship Invictus Rex. Drason stood on the command deck as its shadow eclipsed the stars. His vox crackled, and a voice spoke, deep, cold, unmistakable. "This is Lord Commander Tregor of the 13th. We come not for war, but for remembrance." Drason froze. The Line 3 were the Ultramarines' progenitors, the line lost before Guilliman's return. But their heraldry was not blue. It was white, pure and unpainted, as if washed clean of the lies of the Imperium. "We bring word from Terra," Traeger said. "The Emperor stirs, the Golden Throne falters. Guilliman's silence has doomed us all." The signal ended. The sky above Macraga ignited. Orbital batteries turned inward, firing upon the descending fleet. The Invictus Rex retaliated, not with weapons, but with a transmission. A psychic wave spread across Ultramar, bleeding into the minds of every soldier, priest, and citizen. They saw visions, the Emperor screaming in his throne, chains of light binding his corpse to the fabric of reality. Guilliman standing before him, face lit by sorrow and fire. "You cannot wake him," the Emperor's voice thundered. "I must," Guilliman answered, "for without your light, there is nothing." "Then let there be nothing." The light devoured them both. Across the galaxy, the Astronomicon flickered. For a single heartbeat, the Emperor's light went out. Ships vanished into the warp. Stars dimmed. Entire worlds fell into madness. On Macragge, the Ultramarines dropped to their knees, their faith shattering in unison. The silence afterward was unbearable, an entire empire holding its breath. Then, faintly, impossibly, the light returned, but different. Softer, colder, like the glow of a dying star. Chaplain Erastes emerged from the catacombs, his armor cracked, his eyes glowing faintly like the being he had seen. He looked upon his brothers and spoke words that chilled them more than any curse. "The Emperor is not our god. He is our cage." Drason drew his blade. "Blasphemy." Erastes smiled, weary, almost kind. "No. Revelation." Before Drason could strike, the ground shook. The vaults below burst open one by one. From each rose figures clad in ancient ceramite, the reflections of Guilliman, the failed sons, the unmade legions. Their eyes burned with pale light, their voices united in one echoing decree: the lie must end. Chaos did not return that day. It had never left. But for the first time in 10,000 years, the Imperium turned its guns upon itself, not in hatred, but in awakening. Across Ultramar, churches were torn down, temples emptied, shrines stripped of icons. Mortals wept not from fear, but release. The remembered spread through the void, their message simple: the Emperor sleeps, humanity must wake. And somewhere in the void, aboard the Invictus Rex, an old, scarred Primarch stood in shadow. His face was not Guilliman's, yet his eyes held the same sorrow. He turned toward the dying light of the Astronomicon and whispered, "Brother, you've undone what we swore to protect." Guilliman's voice answered from the void, weary, ancient, and resolute. "I have not undone it. I have set it free." The stars pulsed once, twice, then went still. And in that stillness, something vast began to move, not in the warp, not in reality, but in the space between, where gods dream and men mistake the dream for faith. Macragge burned in silence. The vaults cracked open like tombs. The sons of Ultramar, once the paragons of order, now stood upon the edge of a truth so vast it could no longer be contained. Faith had died, but in its place, something older stirred. A will without divinity, a creation without creator, a humanity no longer kneeling. And from the depths of that awakening came a voice, not divine, not infernal, but unmistakably human. It whispered through the ashes, through the broken prayers, through the dying light of the Imperium. "If the gods will not save us, then we shall save ourselves." The voice grew louder, carried by mortals and marines alike, a new creed born of ruin. The Imperium fractured, the warp howled, the Emperor's throne cracked, and far away in the ruins of Espandor, the tome of the remembered turned a final page, one written in light instead of ink. He knew, it read, and in knowing chose damnation, so that mankind might one day remember what it means to be free. Then the page burned, and across the void, the stars began to whisper back. The stars burned like dying candles, flickering against the black canvas of eternity. In their fading light, the Ultramarines advanced, blue phantoms against a void that no longer cared. Macraga's sons, once hailed as paragons of purity and discipline, now marched beneath banners heavy with ash. Their oaths tasted of rust and regret. Every step echoed through the ruins of 1,000 worlds, each footfall another confession to sins they no longer remembered committing. The Codex Astartes, their sacred scripture, once gleamed like divine law. Now it was a shackle. Each page felt like an iron weight, pressing down upon the soul of every battle brother who dared to think beyond its cold precision. Guilliman's word was gospel, but even gospel could rot in the hands of men. And deep within their ranks, whispers began to stir, whispers of doubt, heresy's first breath disguised as loyalty. Brother Captain Leontus stood upon the ramparts of a ruined shrine world, his armor caked with soot, his eyes reflecting the corpse fires below. He had once prayed every morning to the Emperor, offering his victories as tribute. Now, his prayers were hollow. The enemy had become faceless, not chaos, not Xenos, but the endless machinery of the Imperium itself. He could no longer tell where righteousness ended and tyranny began. In the distance, the hymns of the ecclesiarchy bled through the smoke, carried by vox-hailers that screeched with distortion. A choir of zealots chanted verses of purity as they marched, their words drowned beneath the scream of engines. Among them, a preacher carried a relic of Guilliman's blood, or so they claimed, held aloft like a weapon. "Faith is our armor," he cried. "Doubt is our enemy." But those who marched beside him knew that faith had become another form of control. The civilians of Aurelia's Reach knelt in the mud as the Ultramarines entered the city. They reached out with trembling hands, begging for deliverance. Instead, they received silence. Orders had been given, no aid, no deviation from the mission. The heretics must be purged, and mercy was heresy. As the first bolter rounds tore through the crowd, the prayers turned to screams, and the screams to silence. Leontus did not flinch. He watched as the purity seals fluttered in the hot wind like funeral ribbons. When the smoke cleared, the chaplain walked among the dead. His crozier still dripped. "All who perish in the Emperor's sight are cleansed," he murmured. His voice quavered beneath the rebreather's hiss. But when he looked into the faces of the fallen, children, the old, the faithful, something cracked. He whispered a prayer for forgiveness, but there was no one left to hear it. In the command sanctum above, the data scribes recorded victory logs with mechanical precision. They spoke of pacification, of compliance, of order restored. The truth was reduced to numbers, casualties, purity percentages, requisition codes. No one spoke of the burning shrines or the weeping statues that bled rust in the aftermath. Across the fleet, dreams began to infect the Ultramarines. Some dreamed of Guilliman's eyes turning away in shame. Others saw the Emperor, silent, entombed, his light dimming, his faith feeding on the living. And some dreamed of something far worse, of a new dawn, one where mankind stood without gods, without masters, without chains. These dreams were forbidden, yet they spread like infection. On the bridge of the battle barge Invictus, the librarian knelt before the star map, his psychic senses unraveling beneath the storm of warp voices. The Astronomicon flickered, its brilliance stuttering like a dying flame. "He's fading," he whispered. "Or perhaps he's watching." The words chilled the room. Even the serfs who tended the lumen arrays dared not breathe. When the next order came, it was swift and without ceremony. The Ultramarines were to purge the governor of Vastran IV for treachery. Yet no evidence was presented, no trial permitted. The edict bore Guilliman's seal, though none could say if it was truly his hand. Leontis obeyed. Obedience was survival. But as orbital bombardment turned the planet's oceans into steam, he felt something fractured deep within his mind. He wondered if loyalty had become the last refuge of the damned. Among the surviving populace, a rumor began to spread. Of blue-armored angels who burned the innocent. Of prayers that brought death instead of deliverance. To the Imperium, it was propaganda. To those who lived it, it was truth. In the ruins of the cathedral, a child found a discarded helmet. It bore the sigil of Ultramar, cracked down the center. She stared into its hollow eyes and whispered, "Are you the saviors they promised?" No answer came, only the sound of the wind passing through shattered glass, like the whisper of forgotten prayers. Meanwhile, in the heart of Macragge, political storms gathered. The Primarch's return had brought not only unity, but resentment. Administratum officials feared his reforms. High Lords whispered that Guilliman's loyalty was a mask. Some called him a savior, others a tyrant reborn. And among the Astartes, some began to question. If even a Primarch could wield such power unchecked, what then was the Emperor's will truly worth? A clandestine council formed within the chapter, veterans who had seen too much, fought too long. They called themselves the Silent Ones. Their purpose was not rebellion, but remembrance. They sought to preserve the truth, not the glorious myth, but the blood-soaked reality. One by one they vanished. Records of their existence were deleted. To speak their name became a death sentence. In orbit above a dying world, Leontis stood before the viewport as fire rained across the continents below. "How many more, my lord?" he asked softly. The chaplain beside him answered with ritual conviction, "As many as it takes." But his voice trembled, betraying doubt that no creed could conceal. The next campaign was launched against a world that had already surrendered. The population laid down their arms, praying for mercy. The order still came, exterminatus. The ships prepared to fire. But as the torpedoes armed, the Vox channels erupted with conflicting commands. One transmission, garbled and broken, carried a forbidden tone. "Ceasefire. For the love of him on Terra, ceasefire." It bore Guilliman's encryption. The fleet hesitated. The silence stretched across the void like a blade. When the firing sequence halted, it was too late. The torpedoes had already left their bays. The planet below bloomed into light, and millions of souls turned to ash. The signal cut off. No one spoke. No one moved. The Emperor's light flickered once more, not in the warp, but in their hearts. That night, the librarian dreamed again. He saw Guilliman kneeling before the golden throne, his face a mask of anguish. "They are not my sons," the Primarch whispered. "They are his ghosts." The vision shattered into flame, and the librarian awoke screaming. His psychic aura burned blue-hot, lighting the chamber like a dying star. When his brothers came to restrain him, they found him weeping blood. "We were never meant to save humanity," he gasped. "Only to bury it." The words spread quietly, like a plague that no prayer could cure. And though no one dared to repeat them aloud, every soul aboard the fleet felt their truth. The Ultramarines were no longer the saviors of mankind. They were the instruments of its slow, sanctified extinction. As dawn rose over the ruins of their latest conquest, Leontis removed his helmet and let the ash settle upon his skin. In that still moment, as the wind howled across a dead world, he felt the faintest echo of something sacred. Not the Emperor, not Guilliman, but the memory of what they once fought for. He closed his eyes, and for the first time he prayed not for victory, but for forgiveness. Far away, in the silent corridors of the Imperial Palace, a lone servo-skull drifted past a sealed door. Within, unseen, the golden throne pulsed once, faintly, almost imperceptibly, like a heart remembering how to beat. The storm broke without warning. A scream tore through the void as the fleet descended upon the heretic world of Tarsis Ultra, or so the records would later claim. But there were no heretics here. Only men, women, and children who had once built temples to the Emperor's name. The orders came from High Command, encrypted and absolute. Purge the planet. Guilliman's will. No explanation, no dissent. Leontus stood in the command chamber, surrounded by flickering hololiths. The faces of his brothers glowed in blue light. Warriors, saints, monsters, each bearing the weight of 10,000 years of obedience. "If this is Guilliman's will," he said at last, voice low, "then I would hear it from his own mouth." No one answered. The silence felt heavier than the armor they wore. When the bombardment began, the sky burned like an unholy sunrise. The oceans boiled, the cities turned to molten glass. Choirs of planetary defense adepts sang hymns as they died, their voices merging with the roar of the planet's death. From orbit, it was beautiful. A perfect sphere of light blooming in the void. From the surface, it was damnation made real. The librarian's mind broke beneath the weight of it. His psychic scream echoed through the ships, a soul crying out against the Emperor himself. "We are the heresy," he shouted before his skull split with raw energy, his essence scattering into the warp like shattered glass. For a moment, every astropath in the fleet felt it, the truth ripping through the veil. The chaplain knelt beside his fallen brother, his gauntlets shaking. "He lost faith," he whispered. But even as he said it, the words rang hollow. His own faith had become a wound that would not heal. He looked out at the burning world below and wondered if the Emperor still heard prayers, or only the echoes of screams. Down on the surface, remnants of the 15th Company fought through the ruins. They were no longer executing orders, they were surviving. The air was poison, the ground molten beneath their boots. One by one, their vox links went dead. Among the ruins of a once holy cathedral, Leontus found the corpse of a child clutching a half-melted aquila. He froze. In that moment all the wars, all the orders, all the creeds felt meaningless. He dropped to his knees and whispered, "Forgive us, please." But the wind carried no reply. In the heavens above, the flagship Invictus shuddered. A new signal broke through the void, faint, ancient, impossible. It carried Guilliman's voice. "Stop this," it said, the tone weary, almost human. "You are killing the Emperor's dream." The transmission flickered with static. "The codex was never meant to bind your soul." Then it vanished. Panic rippled through the fleet. Some captains refused the order, claiming heresy. Others prepared to fire again, invoking faith as their shield. The chain of command dissolved. Brother turned on brother. Vox channels became battlegrounds of belief. And in that chaos, a truth emerged. The orders had not come from Guilliman at all. The sigil had been forged, the commands twisted by unseen hands within the administratum. Someone had used the Ultramarines to cleanse loyal worlds. Leontus's fury was silent, absolute. "We are pawns," he said. "We are executioners wearing the robes of saints." He gave the order. No more fire, no more lies. But even as he spoke, the chaplain raised his crozius. "This is heresy," he said, voice trembling. "You defy the word of the Imperium." The two men faced each other in silence, faith against truth, brother against brother. The duel was brief. The chaplain struck first, his weapon glowing with sanctified light. Leontus parried, his blade cutting through prayer and steel alike. When the chaplain fell, his last words were not of defiance but sorrow. "May the Emperor forgive you." Leontus knelt beside him, blood and oil mixing beneath them. "If he is watching," he whispered, "he will forgive us both." The fleet fractured, half swore loyalty to truth, half clung to blind faith. Civil war erupted in orbit. Boarding pods screamed across the void. Power armor clashed in corridors lit by fire. Bolters roared, chains wards screamed. But beneath it all, there was a strange calm. The calm of inevitability. The Imperium had always devoured its own. Now it did so in blue. As the battle raged, the Invictus's bridge was breached. 100 Ultramarines stormed in, their armor scorched, their purity seals burned away. "Stand down!" Leontus bellowed, but they did not listen. They chanted the Emperor's name as they fired. He returned their fury in silence. The bridge became a tomb of gods who had forgotten why they fought. When the guns fell silent, Leontus stood alone amid ruin. The void outside glowed red with debris. Fragments of ships, fragments of faith. The Astronomican's light flickered again, weaker now, as if the Emperor himself turned his face away. The captain walked to the viewport and stared at the burning world below. His reflection stared back. Not a hero, not a monster, but a man who had outlived his own soul. In the chapel of the dying ship, the last survivors gathered. Their armor bore the scars of brothers' blood. "What do we do now?" one asked. No one answered. The chaplain's crozius lay broken at the altar. The candles burned low. The silence was sacred. Leontus looked to the stars and said, "We tell the truth." The Vox systems crackled with static. A new message echoed across the void, not from Terra, not from Guilliman, but from an unknown source deep within the warp. The voice was calm, cold, inhuman. "You cannot save them," it said. "They never wished to be saved." For a heartbeat, every man aboard the ship felt the weight of that truth. Humanity did not need saviors. It needed martyrs. The Invictus was dying. Fire crept through its halls like judgment. The reactor would go critical within hours. Leontus gave the final order: evacuate who they could, save what was left of their history. As the ship's engines failed, he walked to the chapel one last time. The stained glass, depicting the Emperor triumphant, was cracked, light bleeding through like blood. He reached up and touched the face of the Emperor, whispering, "We believed in you. That was our sin." The explosion tore through the void, silent and magnificent. For a moment, the wreckage glowed like a second sun. And then, darkness. The fleet's remnants drifted into the abyss, their signals lost, their legacy erased. Weeks later, a fragment of the Invictus was found by a salvage ship, a single data slate intact amid the wreck. On it were the final words of Captain Leontus. "The Emperor does not need angels, he needs witnesses. Let them know what we became in his name." The message was logged, sealed, and buried by the Inquisition. It was never spoken of again. But somewhere in the void, where the warp hums like a living memory, the ghosts of the Ultramarines still march, not in triumph, but in mourning. Their bolters silent, their banners blackened. They are the Emperor's forgotten sons, carrying a truth too terrible to die. And far beyond, upon the golden throne, a single tear, oil or ichor, none could tell, traced a path down the Emperor's lifeless cheek. The Astronomican flared once more, a blinding light that cut through the galaxy's endless night. For an instant, every soul felt it, a heartbeat, a warning, a promise. Then, silence. Only the echo of faith turned to ash, and the question that would haunt eternity. Were they ever the good guys? The stars hung motionless, cold and unblinking, as if the galaxy itself had forgotten how to move. The fires of war were gone now. Only embers drifted in the void, tiny fragments of ships and men and faith turning slowly through the black. The silence after such ruin was unbearable, almost holy. It was the kind of silence that followed the death of something greater than life, the hush after a god's last breath. Among the wreckage of the Invictus, a lone Vox beacon still pulsed, weak and irregular, like a dying heartbeat. Its signal carried no orders, no hymns, no code of war. only static, and beneath it, the faint murmur of a man's voice, repeating the same line again and again. We believed in the Emperor. That was our sin. The ruins of Macragge itself lay quiet under its eternal storm. Once the heart of Ultramar's pride, its spires now stood hollow, their marble faces scarred by the soot of betrayal. The great statues of Guilliman loomed like ghosts over the plazas, their eyes blind with dust. The people still prayed, but not with conviction. Their prayers sounded like memories now. Words spoken not to reach heaven, but to remember that heaven had once answered. A remembrancer walked among the ruins, a chronicler sent by decree of the administratum to collect historical clarity. His name was forgotten, his face wrapped against the acid winds. He wrote not with devotion but with trembling awe, for he felt the weight of what had been lost. The Ultramarines had vanished, no trace, no record, only whispers of blue phantoms seen on dead worlds where no life should remain. Some said they had been erased by decree. Others said they had chosen exile. He found fragments of their words etched into armor plates and ruined chapels. One read, "The Codex is a cage." Another, "Faith is not obedience, it is the courage to doubt." Such words were heresy, yet they rang with truth, the kind that burned quietly, refusing to die. On one desolate moon, he found what might have been their last gathering place, a chapel built from the hulls of fallen ships, its walls covered in names. There were no altars, no relics, no emperor's sigil, only candles, hundreds of them, still burning despite the cold. The wind that slipped through the gaps in the hull made a sound like breathing. The remembrancer knelt, unsure why, and whispered, "Forgive us." He didn't know to whom he spoke. Perhaps to them. Perhaps to the dream they had destroyed. In the deep void, far beyond the light of terror, a world turned slowly in the dark. Its surface glowed faintly blue, not from sunlight, but from the remnants of warp fire. Here, some said, the last of the Ultramarines had gathered, not to fight, but to watch, to remember. They stood in silence upon its glass plains, their armor pitted and dull. They no longer bore the markings of the Imperium, only blank ceramite, unaligned, unbound. They had shed identity as a snake sheds skin. Leontis was among them, though time had eroded his face and his faith alike. His hair was gone, his eyes dim, but his voice still carried the weight of command. "We were made to serve," he said, more to himself than to those who listened. "But perhaps service without soul is no service at all." The others remained silent. Words had lost meaning long ago. They had spoken all prayers, fought all wars. Now only silence was pure enough to honor the dead. At night, beneath alien skies, Leontis dreamt of Guilliman, not as a god, not as a hero, but as a weary man, kneeling beside the throne, whispering to a corpse that could not hear him. The Primarch's voice was soft, cracked with centuries of sorrow. "I tried to save them," he said. "I tried to give them order so they would not drown in chaos, but I only built another cage." The dream faded like smoke, leaving behind a single, unbearable truth. Even gods could be wrong. The remembrancer recorded these tales, piecing together a mosaic of tragedy from the ashes of history. Each fragment spoke of devotion twisted into dogma, of honor consumed by duty. He began to realize that the Ultramarines had not fallen from grace. They had outgrown it. They had looked into the Emperor's light and seen the shadows it cast. In their pursuit of perfection, they had found the cost of obedience and chosen to bear it in silence. When he returned to Terra, his writings were seized, redacted, and sealed. The Inquisition declared the accounts apocryphal, the author deluded. The vaults beneath the imperial palace swallowed his words, as they had swallowed countless truths before. Yet in the archive's endless dark, the pages whispered still. The ink refused to fade. Centuries later, a serf on a forgotten mining world uncovered one of those fragments. The parchment was brittle, the letters faint, but the words survived. We are not heroes. We are the echo of faith after it dies. The serf showed it to no one. He simply read it beneath the light of a single candle, and for the first time in his life he prayed, not for salvation, but for understanding. And perhaps somewhere in the warp, the ghosts of the Ultramarines heard him. Perhaps in that single act of quiet remembrance, their purpose endured. In the age that followed, as the Imperium dragged its broken body across millennia, the legend of the Ultramarines changed. No longer were they paragons of purity. They became myth, the silent guardians of truth, the lost sons who had walked too far into the Emperor's light and vanished. Some said they still fought, unseen, striking against corruption in his name. Others said they wandered the stars in penance, searching for the forgiveness that no god could give, but most simply forgot. And that was the final tragedy. Not that they died, but that they were erased. Their sacrifices absorbed into the vast machinery of history, faceless, nameless, inevitable. Yet sometimes, when a battle ends and the guns fall silent, soldiers swear they see them, figures of blue mist moving through the smoke, faces hidden, voices distant. No sound, no touch, only a feeling, the sense that someone watches, mourning what was lost. They come not as angels or avengers, but as witnesses. They do not speak, they do not judge, they only remember. The remembrancer who wrote their story is long gone now. His quill rests in dust, his bones forgotten. But his final entry survives, carved into the edge of a data slate that no archivist dared erase. It reads, "We are the empire of ashes. We are the prayers that burn. When gods fall silent, it is men who must choose what faith remains." And so the galaxy spins on, ancient and indifferent. The Astronomicon still burns, its light a wound in the warp, bright, eternal, and bleeding. The Emperor still sits upon his throne, neither living nor dead. Humanity still kneels, still kills, still prays. But somewhere in the void, beyond the reach of faith or fear, a single fragment of blue armor drifts through the dark. Upon its surface, worn by fire and time, a few words remain etched, barely legible, yet eternal. Remember us, not as saints, but as men. The stars reflect upon it like tears frozen in glass. The void hums with quiet reverence. There are no angels left, no heroes, only echoes of what was once believed. And the question lingers, haunting, unanswered, infinite. If faith demands blindness, then what becomes of those who choose to see? If salvation costs our humanity, is it worth the price of the soul? The silence stretches vast and eternal, as if the galaxy itself pauses to listen. And in that silence, the faintest whisper, almost human, almost prayer. For the Emperor. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of their fall and the truth in their silence, like, subscribe, and share this chronicle. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and let the galaxy know that even in the darkest corners of faith, the echoes of humanity still endure.